Howdy folks, Vic from Distilled here with a really fun tasting. I'm putting two whiskeys head to head. The two totally different styles of whiskey, but I thought this would be a really fun one. I have Pendleton Blended Canadian Whiskey going up against Bulleit Bourbon Frontier Whiskey. This is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. For the podcast episode coming out next week, Tuesday, be sure to check it out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I did a Canadian flight of whiskeys, blended whiskeys, comparing them, 4 different whiskeys, and really enjoyed the Pendleton. And it's got a bucking horse with a cowboy on there, and so I thought it'd be really fun to put this whiskey, which Pendleton brags, true Western tradition, up against a frontier whiskey. Pendleton is named after the Pendleton Roundup, which takes place in Oregon and is so far west, they call the West the East. If you know that movie reference, put it in the comments. So this is a Canadian whiskey, blended Canadian whiskey, but it's imported and bottled here in the U.S. Pendleton, as far as I can figure out, is an American company, and this kind of contributes to some of the confusion surrounding Canadian whiskey, but I think it'll be interesting. Canadian whiskey, the only requirements are that it be a spirit that from cereal grains that is fermented, distilled, and aged at least 3 years in Canada. There are no requirements on mash bills, no requirements on the blends of whiskeys used, and this one's interesting, and I'll get into it. Versus a Kentucky straight bourbon, must be aged at least 4 years, be a spirit fermented, distilled, and aged 4 years in the good old US of A. Neither of these whiskeys have an age statement on them. I have a hunch as to how old the Pendleton is. A lot of people believe Bulleit is about 6 years, somewhere between 6 and 8. And with Canadian whiskey, you can't just trust the color to give a hint to its age, because the distillers can add caramel food coloring and other additives to it. So to guess the age, I won't really be trusting the color. And I'm sipping both of these neat and just going off of flavor alone. Kind of try to figure out which one I think is best. So let's get started. This is the Pendleton. I'm starting off with Pendleton. It comes in at 80 proof, so it is lower of the two, Bulleit being 90. On the color, it's kind of a golden honey, not quite caramel. But again, you can't completely trust that, so give it a swirl. And the viscosity, I mean, it's definitely a bit thicker. You can kind of see that line right here. It's just starting to bead, and we're just getting a few legs. So that tells me, that tells me it is a bit older on the nose. Immediately, vanilla bean. So it did see some oak, obviously. It has this beautiful custard flavor or aroma, and I distinguish vanilla bean versus just vanilla because vanilla bean has a bit of an earthier note to it. Oh, that is gorgeous, with fall stone fruits. I think nectarine, peach, yellow peach, maybe apricot, or even some apple, kind of a red apple. That is gorgeous. That's beautiful. Okay. Oh yeah, that that custard. It's a sweet custard. There's definitely a bit of a syrup. Not honey, not sugar, but syrup. Kind of notes coming through. Custard notes. That vanilla bean. It's like fresh vanilla bean. It's so beautiful. Um, and yeah, peach, like a ripe yellow peach, apricot flavors. It it reminds me of pumpkin juice. Um, if you ever look up the Universal Studios recipe online that someone came up with pumpkin juice, it calls for like orange juice and apple juice and apricot juice, I think. It reminds me of that. So lots of those fall fruits, fall stone fruits, ripe stone fruits. It's really gorgeous. Nice creamy mouthfeel. It just coats the tongue. It coats the mouth well. A nice long finish. I'm feeling it here. It's nice gentle warmth. It kind of wraps you up in a hug right around here, and even comes forward about midway up your tongue. That's a really nice, beautifully balanced, uh, just beautifully balanced whiskey. So I said I have a hunch. I think this is about 7 years. Bit more than 6, maybe not quite 8, but I think it's heavy on the corn. So if they did single malt, single grain whiskeys blended together, I don't think there's a neutral grain spirit. There's just enough spice that makes me think there's a rye whiskey in here, but only a little bit. But definitely heavy corn, and it reminds me of Basil Hayden's. So if they used a mash bill with multiple grains, it's probably very similar to Basil Hayden's, because I get a lot of those same peach, fall fruit, stone fruit, custard notes that I typically get out of a Basil Hayden's. That's very nice. Good job, Pendleton. Next up, Bulleit. A little bit darker color, so probably saw a little bit more oak. Could be just a little bit older. The viscosity, again, it's just starting to beat up along that line. You can kind of see it around here. I'm just getting some legs now, so I don't use that to try to figure out alcohol. It's not like a wine where you can do that. That helps figure out its age. Oh yeah, orange zest, baking spice, pepper. That's a high rye bourbon for sure. Vanilla, light vanilla, not nearly as much vanilla as Pendleton. Yeah, that's Bulleit, high rye bourbon. That's good. Again, the orange zest, orange peel, not so much zest, orange peel. I think there's a difference. Zest has a more juicier, fresher. Peel is a little bit more subdued, oily. A little grassiness that you would expect from a rye, in my opinion. That black pepper, or not black pepper, but that pepper kind of spice. Some baking spices that, I typically get baking spices, clove, allspice kind of stuff. Maybe a little nutmeg. For sure, baking spices. Orange peel, a little bit of vanilla, and just a hint of like a dried grass. That's a nice bold bourbon. Okay. Just on taste alone. Bulleit is my everyday sipper. I will admit that. I'm a little biased towards it. But I think in this face-off, Pendleton wins. So, Pendleton, it is a blended Canadian whiskey, but I think they did a fantastic job. It's beautifully balanced. It's got the right amount of sweetness. It's not too punchy or, too rough around the edges. It's a great whiskey. Enough said. It's a great Canadian whiskey, but it is a great whiskey in general. So, I know Canadian whiskeys sometimes get a bad rep. I talk about that in the podcast, but if you see Pendleton Blended Canadian Whiskey, and I'm not getting paid for this, if you see it on the shelves, pick it up. I know price is super local. I buy 750 bottles of Bulleit for $39.99. I picked up this 750 for $23.99, and it was right next to the Crown Royal. So, is it a premium whiskey? It's billed as a premium, but I leave that up to you to figure out. Yeah, this might be my new everyday sipper. It's just so beautifully balanced, very nice. I love that vanilla and custard. So, Pendleton, cheers to you. Congrats. And cheers to you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for checking this out. Take care, folks.